I am Milo. I am the one who will be here with you in this warm and quiet space. Tonight, you will be listening to a video titled Jungian's Lessons on Overdoing Rest and Realignment, a gentle journey guided by the profound perspective of Carl Gustav Jung, where we learn how to pause, rest, and realign our inner life. There are many nights when you lie down, yet your mind keeps working, refusing to stop. Not because there is still unfinished work, but because you have grown accustomed to living in a state of constant effort, trying to understand, trying to fix, trying to move forward, trying to become a better version of yourself. But according to Jung, it is precisely this overdoing that leaves modern human beings exhausted, empty, and lost. Jung once reminded us with a sentence that is very short, yet profoundly deep. We cannot change anything unless we accept it. When you constantly force yourself to be okay, to be strong, to control outcomes, your inner life resists through anxiety, exhaustion, and sleeplessness. The problem is not that you haven't done enough. The problem is that you haven't yet learned how to stop. It's all right. Now allow yourself to soften. Let your body sink gently into the warmth of your bed. Feel yourself being supported. The space around you is settling, quiet, calm, and safe. Bring your attention to your breath, relaxed, and without control, simply listening to the slow rhythm of the air as it gradually moves in and out. According to Jung, when the ego releases its obsession with control, the inner universe begins to regulate itself. Within the vast field of the collective unconscious, personal worries become small, and at the same time, your presence remains just as meaningful as anything that exists. The only intention in this moment is to enjoy comfort, to relax the body, and to soothe the mind. Gently drift into deep sleep whenever drowsiness comes to you. I am still here, and I will continue to speak slowly and peacefully, in quiet, in peace. Yes, from the perspective of Carl Gustav Jung, one of the greatest paradoxes of modern humanity lies in this. We believe we are lacking effort, when in reality, we are drowning in it. We live in a culture that worships action, speed, and control. Doing more is seen as progress. Rest is misunderstood as regression. Doing nothing is labeled as laziness, irresponsibility, even failure. But Jung saw the opposite. It is precisely the ego's constant compulsion to act that becomes the deep source of anxiety, exhaustion, and inner disorientation. In Jungian psychology, the ego is the center of consciousness, the part of us that wants to define itself, to control, to be certain. The ego operates through goals, plans, and outcomes. It lives in linear time and is always oriented toward the future. The problem is not that the ego is bad or wrong, but that it does not know when to step back. When the ego believes, "If I don't act, everything will collapse," it enters a state of permanent defense. Jung called this the fertile ground of neurosis, a place where effort no longer leads to creativity, but produces only tension. Jung once wrote a sentence that is brief, yet deeply arresting. "Hurry is not of the devil. Hurry is the devil." This statement does not merely criticize external haste. It strikes directly at the pressured rhythm of inner life. When we rush to understand, to fix, to heal, to become okay as quickly as possible, we unknowingly sever our connection with a deeper wisdom within what Jung called the self. The self does not operate through coercion. It moves according to a natural, non-linear rhythm, rich with meaning. And the self can only speak when the ego is willing to fall silent. It is precisely here that the paradox of doing nothing begins to reveal itself. Doing nothing, according to Jung, is not surrender. It is the release of control. It is the moment when the ego stops its monologue, stops imposing direction, and allows the inner life to regulate itself. Jung emphasized that genuine psychological transformation does not occur when we try to force it. He wrote, "We cannot change anything unless we accept it. This acceptance is not passive. It is a profound psychological act that requires courage. Because when we do nothing, what we have been avoiding begins to surface. Emptiness, fear, anxiety, meaninglessness. Yet it is within this very space that the shadow, the rejected part of ourselves, begins to appear. Jung believed the shadow is not an enemy, but energy locked away because it has not been acknowledged. When we pause long enough to feel without judgment, that frozen energy begins to thaw. In modern society, people often fear silence, fear being alone with themselves. Because in silence, there is nothing left to cling to, no roles to perform, no distractions to maintain. But Jung viewed silence as a sacred doorway. He believed the unconscious does not destroy the human being, but self-regulates and heals if it is given space. He wrote, "The unconscious is not just evil by nature. It is also the source of the highest good." Thus, doing nothing is not abandoning life, but trusting a deeper intelligence than reason alone. It is the moment we allow dreams, intuition, bodily sensations, and meaningful coincidences, synchronicity, to guide us. These phenomena do not arise when we chase them, but when we realign inwardly. When the ego steps back, the outer world begins to reflect a new inner order. Jung often used alchemical imagery to describe inner transformation. Before gold can appear, matter must undergo dissolution and fermentation. If rushed, the process fails. Similarly, when we force ourselves to heal quickly or break free quickly, we create further fragmentation. Patience, for Jung, is not passive waiting. It is conscious participation in the process. It is a paradoxical form of action, acting by not interfering. The paradox of doing nothing also challenges another deeply rooted belief of the ego that human worth comes from achievement. Jung countered this with the concept of individuation, the process of becoming oneself. Individuation is not about meeting social standards, but about returning the ego to its proper role in service of the self. And sometimes the most important step on that journey is not moving forward, but stopping. Jung wrote, "The shoe that fits one person pinches another." There is no recipe for living that suits all cases. When we stop chasing universal formulas, we begin to listen to our own rhythm of life. That rhythm may be slower, quieter, less radiant, but more authentic. And within that authenticity, a new kind of strength emerges, the strength of presence. No need to prove, no need to perform, no need to fix. Ultimately, doing nothing, according to Jung, is a sacred practice. It asks us to dare to stand still in a world obsessed with movement, to dare to trust that when the ego steps back, life does not collapse, it falls into place. In that state, we are no longer driven by fear or compulsion, but guided by meaning. And perhaps this is what modern humanity has forgotten, that sometimes the greatest power does not lie in making one more effort, but in having the courage to stop and listen. After touching the paradox of doing nothing in the previous section, another door begins to open, a door that leads directly into the central conflict of inner life, the ego and the self, when we pause long enough to realize that forced effort only creates more tension. A deeper question emerges. What within us has been doing the pushing? For Jung, the answer does not lie in circumstances, but in the ego's dominance over the self. It is precisely at this point that we begin to understand why the more we force life, the more life resists. In Jungian psychology, the ego is the center of consciousness, the part of us that knows who we are, what we want, what we fear, and what we feel we must control in order to feel safe. The ego operates through logic, plans, goals, and linear time. It wants certainty, quick results, and reassurance that today's effort will produce tomorrow's reward. The ego is not bad. It is necessary for us to function in the world. But problems arise when the ego appoints itself as the center of the entire psyche, forgetting that it is only one part of a much larger picture. That larger picture Jung called the self, the totality of being. The self is not an idealized ego or a better version of oneself. It is the deepest center of the entire psyche, where consciousness and the unconscious meet where meaning is formed. The self operates on a deep, non-linear rhythm that cannot be forced. It does not care about speed, but about ripeness. It does not care about achievement, but about wholeness. Jung described the self as the archetype of inner order, and emphasized that the ego is healthy only when it serves the self, not when it tries to replace it. Suffering begins when the ego forgets its place, when the ego believes it must control everything: emotions, relationships, the future, the healing process. It enters a stance of confrontation with life itself. Jung observed that many psychological disorders do not arise from a lack of ability, but from the rigidity of will. He wrote, "Neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering." When the ego refuses to accept the deeper rhythm of the self, it tries to avoid uncertainty through control. But control does not reduce suffering. It only compresses it. And what is repressed will eventually push back through anxiety, depression, insomnia, exhaustion, or a vague sense of meaninglessness. Life resists, not because we are doing something wrong, but because we are doing too much from the position of the ego. Jung repeatedly warned against the illusion of willpower. He did not deny the strength of determination, but he clearly understood its limits within inner life. There are transformations that cannot occur through force because they belong to the unconscious, a realm over which the ego has no direct authority. Jung stated this very plainly. We cannot change anything unless we accept it. Acceptance here does not mean surrendering to fate. It means restoring the ego to its proper position. When the ego learns to listen rather than command, the self begins to lead. But the ego often fears this because the self does not promise quick results. The self speaks through symbols, dreams, and meaningful coincidences, synchronicity, not through 5-step plans. Jung described this relationship with a striking image. The ego is like the rower, and the self is the river. When the ego insists on rowing against the current, exhaustion is inevitable. Forcing life, therefore, is not merely an issue of attitude. It is a disconnection from one's own being. When the ego lives according to external standards, success, productivity, being okay, being strong, it gradually loses contact with its deepest center. Jung called this state one-sidedness, an imbalance of consciousness. And the unconscious, whose role is compensation, will respond. Jung wrote, "The unconscious compensates the conscious attitude, the resistance of life. Crises that appear irrational is in fact the self's attempt to restore balance. The more we force ourselves in one direction, the more strongly the unconscious pulls us toward the opposite. This is not punishment, but a corrective signal. Yet the ego often misinterprets this signal and tries harder. This loop exhausts people not because life is too difficult, but because the inner battle is unnecessary. In the process of individuation, becoming oneself, Jung emphasized that the ego's task is not to lead, but to cooperate. The ego must be humble enough to acknowledge that a deeper intelligence is at work. That intelligence does not oppose life, it moves with it. Jung wrote, "The self is not only the center, but also the whole circumference which embraces both conscious and unconscious." When the ego agrees to step back, a profound relief emerges. Not because all problems disappear, but because we are no longer at war with them. Life stops resisting, because it is no longer being forced. Instead, we enter a state of realignment, where action arises from meaning, not from fear. The paradox is this: when the ego stops forcing life to conform to its will, life begins to cooperate. The transition from doing nothing to ego versus self is therefore a natural step. When we learn to stop, we begin to see who within us has been pushing. And when we recognize that it is the ego trying to replace the self, we are given a different choice, not to do more, but to listen more deeply. Jung did not promise that this path would be easy, but he believed it was the only path that leads to wholeness. For only when the ego returns to its rightful place does the human being stop fighting life and begin to live with it. From the conflict between the ego and the self in the previous section, a deeper layer of the issue gradually comes into view. When the ego appoints itself as the center and attempts to control the rhythm of life, it not only overrides the self, but also creates a dangerous belief. If I do not control things, everything will collapse. It is this belief that pushes human beings into a state of constant tension, where life is no longer a flowing process, but becomes a sequence of tasks that must be made to happen. For Jung, this is the point at which the illusion of control is born, and it is also the deep root of anxiety and exhaustion. In Jungian psychology, the illusion of control is not mere ambition. It is a reaction born of fear. The ego fears uncertainty. The ego fears chaos. The ego fears the empty space where it is no longer the commander. And so it clings to plans, to schedules, to rapid results. Making things happen becomes a survival strategy. But Jung observed that this very strategy weakens the psyche. When everything is forced, inner life loses its capacity for self-regulation, and the consequence is neurosis. Jung defined neurosis as a condition in which psychic energy becomes trapped due to unacknowledged conflict. He wrote a sentence that is brief, yet incisive. Neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering. In other words, when human beings do not allow themselves to experience the rightful anxiety of not being in control, they create substitute symptoms: anxiety, obsession, chronic fatigue. Instead of facing the truth that life is inherently uncertain, the ego chooses to tighten its grip. But the tighter the grip, the greater the pressure becomes. Control does not soothe fear. It merely disguises fear through action. Here, Jung offers a perspective radically different from modern psychology's emphasis on control techniques. He did not view the unconscious as a threat that must be tamed, but as a source of self-regulating intelligence. When the ego believes that everything will fail, unless it constantly supervises, it has lost trust in the self. Jung warned that a one-sided conscious attitude will always be compensated by the unconscious. He wrote, "The unconscious compensates the conscious attitude." This means that when consciousness over-controls, the unconscious responds with phenomena beyond control. Crises, disturbing dreams, emotional eruptions, or exhaustion without a clear cause. These phenomena are not system failures. They are balancing signals. But the ego often misinterprets them as failure and responds by trying to control even more. This loop is precisely the path that leads to burnout. The illusion of control is also deeply bound to time. The ego lives in linear time. The faster, the better. The sooner, the safer. But the self operates in psychological time, the time of ripening. Jung repeatedly emphasized that deep transformations cannot be accelerated without cost. When the ego pushes the process, it shortens the necessary stages of dissolution and fermentation. And when something unripe is forced into form, the psyche resists. Jung once offered a reminder that is simple yet uncompromising. We cannot change anything unless we accept it. This acceptance is the antidote to the illusion of control. It is not resignation, but an acknowledgement of the limits of willpower. When the ego accepts that not everything lies within its grasp, a new space opens, a space in which the self can work. But to enter that space, the ego must endure the fear of not controlling. And that fear is precisely what many people avoid by staying busy. Modern culture glorifies busyness as a virtue. Doing more equals being valuable. Rest is seen as dangerous. Jung recognized in this a collective distortion. When society worships control and efficiency, human beings gradually lose the capacity to remain in a state of doing nothing without panic. Yet according to Jung, the ability to tolerate that empty space is the true sign of inner maturity. When we no longer need to make things happen, we begin to allow things to happen according to their own rhythm. The illusion of control also distorts our relationship with suffering. The ego believes that with sufficient control, suffering can be avoided. Jung rejected this belief. He regarded suffering as an indispensable part of awakening. He wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." When we attempt to avoid suffering through control, we merely postpone it and often intensify it. Exhaustion, in many cases, does not arise because life is too heavy, but because we are carrying what does not need to be carried. When the ego loosens its grip, suffering becomes legitimate, and therefore shorter, cleaner, and less destructive. The transition from part 2 to part 3 thus unfolds naturally from recognizing that the ego overrides the self. We move deeper to see the psychological mechanism driving this behavior, the fear of collapse. When we understand that control is a response to fear, not an expression of strength, our attitude toward ourselves begins to soften. Jung did not call for the abandonment of will, but for placing will in its proper position. Will should serve the process, not dominate it. Jung brings us back to a familiar paradox when the ego stops trying to make everything happen. Life does not fall into chaos. It returns to its own order. Anxiety decreases, not because we control better, but because we no longer need to control. Exhaustion fades, not because we rest more, but because we stop fighting the current. In that letting go, the self begins to speak not loudly, not urgently, but clearly enough to guide the way. And perhaps this is the freedom modern human beings have been seeking in the wrong place all along. After moving through the illusion of control in the previous section, another truth gradually becomes clear. Exhaustion does not arise only from doing too much, but from doing the wrong thing in the wrong place. When the ego believes that its value lies in its ability to achieve, to control, and to prove itself, it pushes itself into a race with no finish line. And it is precisely in this moment of fatigue that Jung's fundamental question emerges. If not achievement, then what truly constitutes human maturity? His answer leads us to the very center of Jungian psychology, individuation, the process of becoming oneself. In common understanding, maturity is often measured by social standards, a stable career, a respectable image, clearly defined roles, the ability to meet expectations. But Jung argued that these measures reflect only surface adaptation. They say little about inner development. Individuation is not about becoming more successful, but about becoming more whole. It is the process through which the ego learns to step away from the position of central authority and serve the self, the deepest center of the psyche. Jung emphasized that the ego is necessary, but it should not be the commander. When the ego equates self-worth with achievement, it loses contact with the inner rhythm of life. Individuation, therefore, is not another goal to be attained, but a reordering. The ego is not eliminated. It is restored to its proper place. Jung described this clearly. Individuation means becoming an individual, and insofar as individuality embraces our innermost last and incomparable uniqueness, it also implies becoming one's own self. This statement reveals something essential. Individuation is not about being different from others, but about returning to one's own uniqueness. And that uniqueness cannot be forced through external standards. It reveals itself only when the ego stops imposing an image of who one should be. One of the greatest misunderstandings about individuation is the belief that it is a continuously upward journey. Jung saw this process as a spiral, sometimes moving forward, sometimes backward, with phases that appear stagnant. It is precisely in these moments of no progress that the most essential transformations often occur. When the ego is forced to stop through fatigue crisis or loss of motivation, the self gains an opportunity to speak. Jung warned that a one-sided consciousness will always be compensated by the unconscious. He wrote, "The unconscious compensates the conscious attitude. When consciousness chases achievement, the unconscious pulls the person back through experiences that slow things down. Exhaustion, disorientation, a sense of meaninglessness. These experiences are not failures of the process. They are turning points in individuation. They compel the ego to ask, if I am no longer achieving, who am I? Here stopping does not mean abandoning life, but suspending the ego's race. Stopping in order to hear what was previously ignored, unnamed emotions, recurring dreams, causeless sadness, or a vague longing not attached to any achievement. Jung regarded these signals as the language of the self. They do not command or pressure. They wait patiently. And only when the ego quiets down does this language become audible. Individuation also requires a particular kind of courage, the courage to not fit in. When we step away from collective norms, the ego loses its familiar supports. Jung emphasized that there is no universal formula for living. He wrote, "The shoe that fits one person pinches another. There is no recipe for living that suits all cases." Inner maturity, therefore, is not about following the book, but about listening to one's own rhythm. That rhythm may be slower, more winding, less recognized, but it is authentic. And authenticity is the prerequisite of individuation. For the self does not care about being praised. It cares about inner alignment. Jung also recognized the profound connection between individuation and suffering. He did not see suffering as something to be avoided through achievement, but as a catalyst for consciousness. He wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." When the ego relies on achievement to avoid suffering, the process of individuation is delayed. But when the ego accepts stopping and feeling suffering, becomes information, no longer an enemy. In that felt experience, rejected parts, the shadow are integrated, locked energy is released, and the human being becomes more complete, not merely better. The key point of individuation lies here. Maturity does not mean becoming stronger, but becoming more honest. Honest about limits, about rhythm, about the need for rest. Jung did not advocate passivity. He advocated cooperation between the ego and the self. When the ego stops forcing life to conform to its will, life does not collapse. It returns to a deeper order. Achievement does not disappear, but it no longer defines identity. From recognizing that the illusion of control produces anxiety and exhaustion, we arrive at a new vision of maturity. Not by controlling better, but by placing the ego in its rightful position. And sometimes, the most mature action is not taking one more step forward, but stopping long enough to allow the self to lead. In that stopping, human beings do not lose their value. They find themselves again. After touching individuation in the previous section, a subtle yet decisive movement begins to unfold. When the ego learns to step back from the central position, when a person dares to step out of the race for achievement and stops forcing themselves to become a new inner, space opens. This space is not loud, nor does it offer immediate answers, but it possesses one unmistakable quality: silence. And it is within this silence, according to Carl Gustav Jung, that the self begins to speak. Jung observed that most modern people do not lack information, but lack inner space. The ego is accustomed to monologue, analyzing, planning, evaluating, correcting, interpreting. It speaks incessantly, even when we lie down to rest. But the self, the deep center of the psyche, does not speak the language of the ego. The self does not argue, persuade, or pressure. It waits, and it speaks only when the ego is willing to remain swent long enough. Jung once wrote, "The unconscious is not just evil by nature. It is also the source of the highest good." This statement establishes a crucial reversal. The unconscious is not a dark territory to be controlled, but a natural source of wisdom, obscured by the noise of consciousness. When the ego ceases its monologue, the unconscious is no longer pushed away, and communication begins not directly, not linearly, but through symbols. The first and clearest form of this voice is the dream. Jung regarded dreams as a royal road to the unconscious, though not in the Freudian sense. For Jung, dreams are not merely expressions of repressed desires, but compensatory messages from the self addressed to consciousness. He wrote, "Dreams are the guiding words of the soul." Dreams become most vivid when during waking life the ego is overly controlling and one-sided. When we slow down, when life decelerates, dreams grow richer, more emotionally charged. Not because something dark is emerging, but because the self has finally been given space to speak. Dreams do not demand immediate action. They ask for listening. Alongside dreams, intuition is another channel through which the self communicates. Intuition is not rapid guesswork, nor vague premonition. Jung regarded intuition as an independent psychological function, the capacity to perceive meaning without a chain of reasoning. But intuition appears only when the ego does not attempt to control outcomes. When we force ourselves to be right, intuition falls silent. When we allow ourselves not to know, intuition begins to operate. Jung described it this way: intuition is perception via the unconscious. The paradox is this: the more we try to hear intuition, the less we hear it. Intuition requires silence, as soil requires water. It emerges in moments when we are not seeking it while walking, resting, or letting go of a question. It is then that the self speaks through an immediate sense of direction, not through reasons. A third channel the self uses is bodily sensation. Jung was ahead of his time in viewing the body not merely as biological, but as an integral part of the psyche. When the ego ignores the body in pursuit of goals, the body begins to speak through fatigue, tension, and unexplained pain. But when the ego quiets down, bodily sensation becomes a subtle compass. A feeling of ease, a contraction, a warmth, all are signals. Jung once wrote, "The psyche is not in space. Space is in the psyche. This implies that the body is not separate from inner life. When we are silent enough to feel, the self begins to guide us through signals that are simple yet precise. And then there is perhaps the most intriguing channel of all synchronicity, meaningful coincidence. Jung did not regard synchronicity as magic or superstition, but as a phenomenon in which meaning replaces causality. When the inner world becomes aligned, the outer world reflects that alignment through encounters, images, and events that arrive at the right time. Jung defined it as follows: synchronicity is a causal connecting principle. Synchronicity does not appear when the ego chases plans or demands. It appears when the ego stops interfering. At that point, the self speaks not only from within, but enters into dialogue with the world. These coincidences do not ask for blind belief. They invite attention to meaning. When individuation restores the ego to its rightful place, silence is no longer a frightening void, but a necessary condition. In silence, we do not disappear. We become receptive. And in that receptivity, the self begins to speak in its own language through dreams, intuition, the body, and meaningful coincidences. Jung did not promise that this voice would always be comforting. At times, it challenges us. At times, it slows us down. At times, it asks us to change direction. But he believed it to be the voice of wholeness. When the ego consents to silence, life ceases to resist. In its place, a deep dialogue begins, not loud, not hurried, yet clear enough to guide the way. And perhaps in a world obsessed with noise, silence is the most courageous act through which human beings can find themselves again. After the self begins to speak in the silence described in the previous section, an almost inevitable phenomenon occurs. What has long been avoided starts to surface. When the ego stops distracting itself, stops acting incessantly in order to escape feeling, the inner space becomes quiet enough for the shadow to appear. And this is why Jung insisted that shadow work does not begin with technique, but with stillness. The shadow, according to Jung, is not the bad part in a simplistic moral sense. It is the collection of everything we do not wish to know about ourselves: fear, shame, anger, envy, vulnerability, grief, emotions that do not fit the image the ego wants to maintain. In everyday life, the ego keeps the shadow out of sight through busyness, idealization, rationalization, and constant activity. But when we stop, when we remain silent long enough, the shadow is no longer pushed away. It rises. Jung called the shadow a moral problem for the whole personality, because facing it requires profound honesty. He wrote, The shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality, for no one can become conscious of the shadow without considerable moral effort. This statement reveals that shadow work is not simply about releasing emotions, but an act of maturity. When uncomfortable feelings arise in stillness, the ego's reflex is to treat them as a flaw. Something is wrong with me. But Jung saw the opposite. He understood discomfort as a signal that a rejected part is seeking its way back into consciousness, not to destroy, but to be integrated. In this context, stillness plays a decisive role. When we remain in constant motion, the shadow has no ground on which to appear. It stays trapped as vague tension. But when action stops, when noise diminishes, the shadow becomes more distinct sometimes as a wave of sadness without cause, a sudden surge of anger, or an inexplicable sense of shame. Jung warned that modern people often misinterpret this moment and rush to fix it. But shadow work does not begin with fixing. It begins with enduring and observing. Jung once wrote with striking bluntness about this tendency to avoid people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. This avoidance explains why so many people fear silence. In silence, there are no roles to perform, no tasks to complete, no distractions to shield us. The shadow steps forward and poses a difficult question to the ego. Are you willing to look at me without judgment? The shadow does not demand immediate acceptance. It demands to be seen. Here Jung offered a crucial paradox. The shadow is not dangerous because it is dark, but because it is unconscious. When rejected, the energy of the shadow does not disappear. It turns into projection, overreaction, and recurring conflict. Jung expressed this with a frequently cited line: "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." In stillness, when we are no longer busy blaming circumstances, the shadow reveals itself as an inner force. And in that moment, transformation becomes possible. Fear points to a vulnerable part that has not been protected. Shame points to a need for recognition that has been suppressed. Anger points to a boundary that was once violated. Grief points to a loss that has not yet been mourned. No feeling is a mistake. Each feeling is a message. Jung emphasized that making the darkness conscious does not mean glorifying it. He wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." This places shadow work in its rightful position within the process of individuation. There is no inner maturity that bypasses the shadow. But the shadow can only be integrated when the ego is no longer in a hurry. Stillness provides the necessary rhythm for emotions to be fully felt, rather than analyzed away or labeled. When the self begins to speak in silence, it does not always say pleasant things. Often, the first voice of the self is the shadow, the part that has been abandoned for too long. Jung saw this as a sign of progress, not regression. For only when the shadow appears is the psyche safe enough to work with truth. What matters most is attitude. Shadow work does not require forced excavation. It calls for a gentle presence, staying with the feeling, not fleeing, not judging, not acting immediately. Jung understood that this is a rare skill in a world that worships speed. But he believed it is precisely this slowing down that opens the path to genuine healing. Thus, Jung viewed shadow work as a belated act of self-love. When we dare to remain in stillness long enough to feel what is uncomfortable, we send a profound message to the psyche: I am no longer abandoning you. And in that moment, energy that was once locked away begins to flow. The shadow does not disappear. It returns to its rightful place as part of the whole. From this integration, true strength emerges, not the strength of control, but the strength of wholeness. After shadow work begins, in the stillness described in the previous section, when uncomfortable feelings are allowed to surface without being hastily fixed, a deeper realization gradually takes shape. The shadow is not what is attacking us. What frightens us is not the shadow itself, but prolonged abandonment. From this point, Jung introduces a crucial reversal. The shadow is not a monster. It is the part that was once excluded from love and from consciousness. And only when we stop to look at it without judgment does the energy locked within that darkness become released and transformed into a source of healing. Jung never described the shadow as an evil entity that must be destroyed. On the contrary, he viewed the shadow as a repository of vital qualities pushed aside because they did not fit the image the ego wanted to maintain. This may be anger in a gentle person, a need for attention in a selfless one, or deep sadness in someone who always appears strong. The shadow becomes frightening, not because of its contents, but because it is unconscious. Jung wrote, "Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is." This statement reveals a fundamental principle. The more neglected the shadow is, the more energy it accumulates. When it is not acknowledged that energy does not disappear, it changes form. It becomes excessive reactions, projections onto others, recurring conflicts, or unexplained aversions. In these cases, the shadow is not evil. It is simply trying to be seen. What often causes the shadow to be labeled a monster is the ego's tendency to moralize inner experience. The ego wants to believe it is good, right, reasonable. Any emotion that threatens this image is pushed downward. Jung called this a moral problem of the entire personality because acknowledging the shadow requires relinquishing the illusion of purity. He wrote, "The shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality." But Jung also emphasized that morality here does not mean judgment. It means conscious responsibility. When we take responsibility for seeing the shadow without blaming circumstances or other people, a transformation begins. The shadow no longer needs to be frightening to gain attention. It is invited into dialogue. One common misunderstanding about shadow work is the belief that we must confront or subdue the shadow. Jung opposed this approach. He did not encourage fighting the darkness because fighting only reinforces division. Instead, he emphasized non-judgmental observation. When we look at the shadow with curiosity and patience, the frozen energy begins to thaw. Jung expressed this in a well-known line. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Making the darkness conscious does not mean glorifying it. It means releasing it from exile. In exile, the shadow accumulates wild, distorted energy. When it is acknowledged that energy returns in a living, creative form. The paradox is that many of the most positive human qualities reside in the shadow. The assertiveness of someone who is always accommodating the sensitivity of someone who is always rational. The vulnerability of someone who is always strong. Jung observed that when the shadow is integrated, a person does not become worse, but more whole. He wrote, "The gold is in the dark." This brief statement reflects Jung's alchemical perspective. Darkness is not waste. It is raw ore. But ore becomes gold only when it enters the furnace of consciousness, where there is the heat of feeling and the light of attention. Healing appears precisely here. When the shadow is no longer abandoned, the psyche no longer needs to use symptoms to attract attention. Many forms of anxiety, depression, or recurring conflict dissolve not because they are treated, but because they are heard. Jung once remarked bluntly, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." But when a person is courageous enough to remain with the abandoned part, the shadow changes its voice. It no longer screams. It whispers. It points to neglected needs, violated boundaries, ungrieved losses. And when these messages are received, the energy that was once locked away becomes vitality. If the previous section showed that shadow work begins in stillness, this section reveals what happens when we remain in that stillness long enough. We discover that the shadow does not arrive to destroy, but to reunite. Jung regarded this process as an essential step of individuation. There is no wholeness built on exclusion. Non-judgmental observation does not mean accepting every behavior. Jung clearly distinguished between awareness and action. Integrating the shadow does not mean acting out impulses. It means knowing that the impulses exist. When we know, we have choice. When we do not know, the shadow directs our lives from behind the scenes. Jung stated this unmistakably. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. When the shadow is brought into consciousness, we are no longer blindly controlled by it. Instead, we can use its energy creatively. Anger becomes healthy boundaries. Shame becomes humility. Grief becomes emotional depth. Thus, Jung invites us to change our view of the shadow not as an enemy, but as an abandoned child. When it is seen, accompanied, and respected, that child grows. And with it, the human being becomes more human. The shadow does not disappear. It comes home. And in that homecoming, healing is no longer a forced project, but the natural consequence of no longer abandoning any part of oneself. After the shadow has been acknowledged without judgment in the previous section, when the abandoned part is invited back and the locked energy begins to thaw, subtle inner alignment emerges. No longer straining to control, no longer fighting against itself, the psyche enters a state of ordered quiet. And it is precisely within this state that Jung observed a particular phenomenon. The outer world begins to respond. He called this phenomenon synchronicity, not a reward for effort, but a consequence of aligned stillness. Jung emphasized that synchronicity does not occur when we chase it. Any attempt to create coincidence arises from the ego, the part that wants control, confirmation, quick proof. But synchronicity belongs to a different order. It appears when the ego steps back, when the self leads, when inner energy becomes harmonized. Jung defined this phenomenon precisely. Synchronicity is a causal connecting principle. A causal here does not mean random or meaningless. It means that meaning replaces cause and effect. When an outer event and an inner state meet in the same meaning without a direct causal link, synchronicity appears. And its prerequisite is stillness, a silence deep enough for meaning to be recognized. Jung observed that moments of synchronicity often arrive after crisis, after surrender, after a rigid, conscious attitude has softened. This aligns completely with the compensatory principle of the unconscious. When consciousness stops forcing the unconscious steps in to restore balance. Jung wrote, "The unconscious compensates the conscious attitude. Stillness, active stillness, is precisely the condition that allows this compensation to unfold harmoniously. When inner conflict subsides, energy no longer leaks through defenses. The psyche reaches a state of resonance, and the outer world mirrors that resonance through right-timed coincidences. What matters is this synchronicity is not a sign meant to make decisions for us, nor a mystical message demanding belief." Jung warned against idolizing the phenomenon. He regarded synchronicity as symbolic language, an invitation to attend to meaning, not a command to obey. And to hear this language, the ego must be quiet. For when the ego is loud, it hears only what it wants to hear. Stillness, therefore, is not passivity. It is a state of attunement. In stillness, we do nothing to pull the world toward us. We place ourselves correctly. When we are correctly placed, the meaningful connections that already exist become visible. Jung expressed this spirit in a profound observation. We cannot change anything unless we accept it. This acceptance opens the door to stillness. When we stop forcing reality, we allow reality to speak in its own language, and that language often arrives through images. Encounters a book opening to the right page, or a sentence heard at exactly the right moment. Not because the universe is favoring us, but because consciousness is quiet enough to perceive meaning. Jung noted that synchronicity often appears powerfully during crucial phases of individuation when the ego learns to serve the self. This is the moment when inner order is re-established. In Alchemy, one of Jung's great inspirations, this stage corresponds to conjunctio, the harmonious union of opposites. When inner opposites are reconciled, the outer world reflects that reconciliation. Jung wrote, "Meaning makes a great many things endurable, perhaps everything." At its deepest level, synchronicity is not meant to impress. It carries meaning, and meaning can only be felt in stillness. When we chase signs, we miss meaning. When we stop, meaning finds us. When the shadow is no longer viewed as a monster, when abandoned energy is integrated, the inner world reaches the wholeness required to resonate with life itself. Stillness is no longer frightening. It becomes the ground. Upon that ground, synchronicity is not strange. It is the natural expression of alignment. The paradox is this: the more we try to attract synchronicity, the more absent it becomes. For every attempt to attract is a sign of control. Jung repeatedly emphasized that what belongs to the unconscious does not obey the will. It responds to attitude, not command. When the attitude is surrender, listening respect for the deeper energy becomes coherent. And within that coherence, the outer world becomes more ordered. Thus, Jung invites us to see synchronicity not as magic, but as a quiet confirmation that we are moving in the right rhythm. Not a fast rhythm, not a noisy one, but the right one. Stillness opens the door to synchronicity, because in stillness, the ego stops interfering. The self is allowed to lead, and meaning has space to appear. At that point, we no longer have to chase life. Life meets us at the intersection of stillness and meaning. After stillness opened the door to synchronicity in the previous section, when inner energy became aligned and the outer world began to mirror inner change, a deeper layer of understanding gradually emerges. We begin to realize that those right-timed coincidences are not merely rare phenomena or random rewards. For Carl Gustav Jung, they are the symbolic language of a deeper order at work. Not the logic of cause and effect, but the logic of meaning and timing. And when the ego quiets down long enough, symbols appear at precisely the right moment to guide the individual journey. Jung introduced the concept of synchronicity to describe simultaneous events that share meaning without a direct causal connection. He described it as a connecting principle, different from classical mechanics. His well-known definition states clearly, synchronicity is a causal connecting principle. A causal does not mean chaotic or without order. On the contrary, Jung believed that at a deep level, the psyche and the world share a common foundation of meaning. When consciousness reaches a state of quiet alignment, meaning itself becomes the binding force. What connects is no longer a chain of push and pull events, but a meeting at the right moment between symbol and inner experience. This marks an important shift from the way the ego habitually understands the world. The ego believes in plans, in control, in if-then logic. It seeks answers through prediction and optimization. But synchronicity does not answer the question, why did this happen? Instead, it asks a different one. What does this mean for you right now? Only when the ego grows quiet can this question be heard. Jung wrote, "Meaning makes a great many things endurable, perhaps everything. Meaning, not power, is what enables human beings to continue. And synchronicity is the form meaning takes when it enters lived experience." Here Jung emphasizes the role of the symbol. A symbol is not a sign with a fixed definition. It is a bridge between consciousness and the unconscious, between what is known and what is still forming. Symbols appear when words fall short. In synchronicity, the symbol may take the form of an image, an encounter, a phrase, or a book that accidentally opens to the right page, no to command, but to suggest direction. Jung understood this clearly when he wrote, "The symbol is the best possible expression for something that cannot yet be fully known." When the ego grows quiet, symbols have space to emerge. Not because the universe is sending signals, but because consciousness has become still enough to recognize them. Before this shift, the same event may pass by as random. Afterward, it becomes a meaningful marker. The difference lies in the attitude of the one who perceives. Jung also warned that synchronicity is not meant for pursuit. Any attempt to manufacture signs is an act of the ego, the part that wants quick confirmation. But the unconscious does not respond to commands. It responds to attitude. The right attitude is acceptance, listening, and respect for the deeper rhythm. Jung reiterated this foundational principle. We cannot change anything unless we accept it. This acceptance gives rise to stillness. Stillness creates the capacity to read symbolic language. In this state, synchronicity does not require blind belief. It is read like a dream, slowly, contextually, and within the framework of one's own individuation process. Another crucial point, synchronicity does not replace personal responsibility. Jung opposed turning it into superstition or using it as a decision-making substitute for consciousness. Symbols open direction. The ego must still discern and act consciously. This is the true collaboration between ego and self. Jung described this relationship through a holistic understanding of the self. The self is not only the center, but also the whole circumference, which embraces both conscious and unconscious. When the ego quiets enough to let the self lead, symbols appear at the right moment, neither too early to create illusion, nor too late to breed despair. Timing is essential. In Alchemy, one of Jung's major inspirations, timing determines success or failure. Likewise, in psychological life, symbols speak only when the psyche is ready. If the previous section showed how stillness opens the door to synchronicity, this section goes further. Synchronicity is a language, the symbolic language of a deeper order, when the shadow is integrated, when inner energy is harmonized, when the ego no longer dominates the inner monologue, meaning finds a place to dwell. The outer world no longer appears as a random sequence. It becomes a symbolic text that can be read. Jung observed that synchronicity often appears at turning points in the personal journey, when confirmation is needed, when a change of direction is required, when patience is called for. But confirmation here is not right or wrong by ego standards. It is resonance. Resonance between a question ripening within and an image appearing without. When resonance occurs, people are not agitated, they become still, because meaning has touched the right place. Indeed, Jung invites us to learn a subtle art reading symbols without attachment. Synchronicity is not the only compass. It is a signpost that appears when needed. When the ego quiets, symbols arrive at the right moment to guide individuation, not loudly, not dramatically, but clearly enough to continue the path. And perhaps, in a world obsessed with control learning, the symbolic language of the universe is precisely learning how to live by meaning at the right time with the right rhythm. After synchronicity is recognized as the symbolic language of the universe in the previous section, where meaning meets the right moment to guide the individual journey. A deeper step becomes necessary. If symbols are the way the world speaks to the psyche, then the next question is, do we dare to trust the intelligence that is speaking? Here, Carl Gustav Jung leads us to a core foundation of depth psychology, trusting the unconscious, not as a destructive force to be controlled, but as a self-regulating and healing intelligence deeper than reason. Jung lived in an age that worshipped rationality. Consciousness was seen as the illuminating light, while the unconscious was regarded as chaotic darkness. Jung reversed this assumption. He did not deny the role of reason, but he clearly recognized its limits. Reason analyzes measures and plans. It is excellent at navigating the external world. But when confronted with crises of meaning, with dreams with intense and nameless emotions, reason becomes clumsy. Jung wrote, "The unconscious is not just evil by nature, it is also the source of the highest good." This statement is not a romanticization of the unconscious, but a declaration of balance. The unconscious contains both chaotic impulses and healing potential. What matters is not the content itself, but the relationship consciousness has with the unconscious. When the ego treats the unconscious as an enemy, it activates defenses. When the ego trusts and listens, the unconscious self regulates. Jung observed that the unconscious has a compensatory function. When consciousness becomes one-sided, overly controlling, excessively rational, obsessed with performance, the unconscious responds in order to restore balance. He wrote, "The unconscious compensates the conscious attitude. This compensation is not meant to destroy life, but to protect the wholeness of the psyche. But if the ego fails to understand this mechanism, it interprets the messages of the unconscious as malfunctions, anxiety, depression, disturbing dreams, overwhelming emotions." Jung saw in these phenomena signals of healing provided that we are still enough to listen. Dreams are the clearest channel of communication from the unconscious. Jung viewed dreams as guidance, not as puzzles to be solved immediately. He wrote, "Dreams are the guiding words of the soul." Dreams do not issue commands. They suggest direction. When the ego tries to control interpretation, dreams lose meaning. When the ego quiets down, dreams open a field of meaning. What matters is not what the dream says, but where we are in order to hear it. Trusting the unconscious, therefore, is not blind faith. It is trust in a process. Alongside dreams, intuition is another voice of deep intelligence. Jung distinguished intuition from guesswork. Intuition does not jump to conclusions. It apprehends the whole. He defined it as intuition is perception via the unconscious. Intuition functions only when the ego is not in a hurry. When we force ourselves to be certain, intuition falls silent. When we allow ourselves not to know, temporarily, intuition emerges as a felt sense of direction. Trusting the unconscious here means accepting life with openness, rare skill in a culture obsessed with control. Intense emotions are also messages from the unconscious. Jung rejected the view that emotions are disturbances to be eliminated. He saw emotions as energy bound to meaning. When emotions surge, the unconscious is knocking at the door, but only when we are sufficiently still can emotions reveal information rather than sweep us away. Jung wrote, "Where there is emotion, there is consciousness. Emotions that are listened to become guidance. Emotions that are repressed become symptoms." Trusting the unconscious means trusting that emotions do not arise to destroy us, but to reorient us. Jung placed particular emphasis on the attitude of acceptance. There can be no trust if the ego still insists on controlling outcomes. He reiterated a foundational principle. We cannot change anything unless we accept it. This acceptance creates stillness. And stillness is the condition that allows the unconscious to speak clearly. When we are sufficiently quiet, the channels of communication, dreams, intuition, emotions, synchronicity, begin to align. They do not contradict one another. They tell the same story from different angles. If Part 9 showed that synchronicity is symbolic language, this section clarifies who is speaking that language. The unconscious, the deep intelligence at the center of the psyche. Trusting the unconscious does not mean abandoning reason. It means placing reason in the correct relationship with the self. Jung described this totality in his definition of the self. The self is not only the center, but also the whole circumference, which embraces both conscious and unconscious. When the ego trusts the unconscious, life does not become chaotic. It becomes more coherent. not because there are fewer events, but because meaning provides orientation. We no longer need to force ourselves to understand immediately. We allow understanding to arrive in its own time. And in that allowance, the unconscious does what it has always done. It self-regulates and heals. Thus, Jung invites us to a mature form of trust, trusting that there is an intelligence at work, while we rest, arranging things, while we are silent, healing, while we listen. Trusting the unconscious is the shift from control to cooperation, from effort to alignment. And perhaps, in a world that overtrusts reason, learning to trust this deeper intelligence is the most courageous act of returning to wholeness. After laying the foundation of trusting the unconscious in the previous section, when we learn to listen to dreams, intuition, and emotions as healing messages, another essential requirement emerges time. If the unconscious possesses an intelligence deeper than reason, then that intelligence does not operate according to the ego's hurried rhythm. Carl Gustav Jung therefore emphasized a truth that is difficult to accept in an age obsessed with speed transformation. Takes time, and patience is not passive, but an active psychological act. Jung often compared inner transformation to alchemy, process that cannot be rushed. In alchemy, matter must pass through successive stages: dissolution, incubation, reconstitution. Each stage has its own rhythm, and any impatient interference ruins the outcome. Jung recognized the same law at work in the psyche. He wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." Pain here is not punishment, but a sign of dissolution. The nigredo stage of alchemy, where old structures collapse to make space for the new. When the ego tries to heal quickly, it often attempts to bypass dissolution, skipping grief, denying anger, labeling difficult emotions as toxic. Jung warned that such avoidance does not heal. It creates fragmentation. Fragmentation occurs when a part of the psyche is forced to be okay before it has been fully felt. Jung described this as a consequence of a one-sided conscious attitude. He wrote, "The unconscious compensates the conscious attitude. When consciousness forces the pace, the unconscious responds with delay symptoms or relapse, not to oppose, but to protect the process." In the logic of the psyche, there are no shortcuts. Patience, therefore, is not passive waiting. It is conscious cooperation with the deep rhythm. The second alchemical stage, incubation albedo, is where many people give up. Outwardly, nothing is happening. Inwardly, everything is happening. Jung understood the ego's temptation at this stage to act, to measure, to see results. But the self does not need to be pushed. It needs conditions. Jung wrote, We cannot change anything unless we accept it. Acceptance here means allowing the process to unfold in darkness. Incubation is the phase in which the unconscious works, organizing, connecting, rebalancing. Demanding early results at this stage is an intrusion into the process. Patience is the psychological act that protects this inner space from being violated. Only in the third stage, reconstitution, rubedo does change, become visible. But Jung emphasized that this outcome cannot appear if the earlier stages are shortened. Reconstitution is not returning to how things were, but returning in a new form. Jung described the nature of this maturation through the concept of individuation, becoming more whole, not more perfect. In a culture of rapid healing, patience is often misunderstood as stagnation. Jung reversed this assumption. He saw patience as the capacity to tolerate uncertainty without rushing to fill it with action. It is a rare psychological strength. He observed bluntly, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. The rush to heal can sometimes be a way of avoiding encounter. Patience forces us to remain with what is unfinished, unclear, and unformed. Yet it is precisely in this state of not yet that the self is restructuring. Jung also warned of another trap, using reason to force the process. Reason wants immediate understanding, immediate explanation, immediate conclusions. But the unconscious speaks in symbols and timing. When we demand instant answers, we impoverish the message. Jung wrote, "The symbol is the best possible expression for something that cannot yet be fully known." Symbols need time to ripen. Patience allows the symbol to stay with us, to repeat, to change form, to gradually reveal its meaning. This is not lack of progress. It is progress at the correct rhythm. If the previous section affirmed that the unconscious possesses healing intelligence, this section emphasizes the condition that allows that intelligence to function, time, and patience. To trust the unconscious without patience is a contradiction. Genuine trust requires refraining from forcing outcomes. Jung understood inner maturity not as a sequence of dramatic breakthroughs, but as a long rhythm of transformation. There are phases of rapid movement, phases of stagnation, and phases that seem like regression. Yet in the logic of the psyche, no step is wasted. Patience is the psychological act of recognizing the value of every stage. Thus, Jung invites a quiet courage, the courage not to rush into a new version of oneself before the old version has been properly honored and laid to rest. Dissolution must be respected. Incubation must be protected. Reconstitution must be awaited. Patience, in this sense, is not standing still. it is standing in the right place. And when we stand in the right place, time, the greatest ally of the psyche, does the rest. After completing the path of time and patience in the previous section, when we learn to remain with the alchemical process of the psyche without forcing outcomes, a natural destination reveals itself. Not a new goal, not a better version of oneself, but a state of being. Carl Gustav Jung referred to this state with remarkably simple words, yet ones that carry profound spiritual depth: doing nothing. Not as an escape, but as a sacred practice where the ego steps back, the self leads, and life naturally begins to fall into place. Jung understood that after all the analysis, integration, and transformation, the psyche does not need more effort. It needs space. Doing nothing here does not mean passivity or resignation. It is an inner attitude defined by 3 clear negations: not running away, not controlling, and not performing. Each negation cuts through a deep habit of the ego and opens a different kind of freedom, the freedom of the self. First, doing nothing means not running away. Running away is not only leaving a situation, it is leaving the experience unfolding within. The ego runs away through busyness, analysis, interpretation, and rapid healing. Jung recognized beneath this a deep fear, the fear of staying with what is. Yet he affirmed that only by staying does consciousness expand. He wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." Pain here is not the goal, but the gateway. Doing nothing means standing before that gateway without turning away, adding no story, adding no action, simply being present. Second, doing nothing means not controlling. After seeing through the illusion of control, after trusting the unconscious, after being patient with the process, the ego is invited to do the most difficult thing of all, to let go. Jung did not see control as evil. He saw it as limited. Control works in the outer world, but it disrupts inner order. He reiterated the fundamental principle: we cannot change anything unless we accept it. Acceptance here is not resignation. It is the withdrawal of the ego from the command position. When the ego no longer gives orders, the self begins to coordinate. And the self does not coordinate through force. It coordinates through meaning. Third, doing nothing means not performing. This is the most subtle point. The ego does not only control, it performs for society, for others, and for itself. It performs strength, understanding, healing, being okay. Jung clearly saw the exhaustion born from having to be someone constantly. He observed, The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Doing nothing is the moment we stop playing roles. No need to prove progress. No need to display enlightenment. No need to convince anyone, even ourselves. When performance stops, a deep relief appears. It is freedom without an audience. In this state, the ego does not disappear. It steps back. And that stepping back does not create chaos. On the contrary, it allows a deeper order to emerge. Jung described the center of that order as the self. The self is not only the center, but also the whole circumference, which embraces both conscious and unconscious. When the self leads life, does not need to be forced into being right. It self-regulates. What needs to leave leaves. What needs to arrive arrives. Not according to the ego's plan, but according to the timing of meaning. Deeply influenced by alchemy, Jung saw doing nothing as corresponding to the stage of Jungian. After dissolution, after incubation, after reconstitution, the psyche reaches a state of inner accord. Here, action no longer arises from fear or deficiency, but from alignment. And the paradox is this: the right action is often less, but far more precise. Doing nothing, therefore, is not the end of the journey, but a way of living after the journey. Jung did not advocate withdrawal from life. He advocated living without being driven by the ego. In this state, synchronicity becomes natural. Intuition becomes clear. Dreams become coherent emotions, find their rightful place. Not because we do better, but because we no longer interfere. After understanding that transformation requires time and patience, as psychological acts, the next step is to stop intervening. The highest form of patience is doing nothing but with full awareness. Jung once said a short sentence with profound meaning. Hurry is not of the devil. Hurry is the devil. Doing nothing is the antidote to that hurry. It restores the natural rhythm of the psyche. And when the rhythm is restored, life falls into place without force. Ultimately, Jung invites us to understand doing nothing as a sacred practice because it requires deep trust. Trust that an intelligence is at work when we stop manipulating. Trust that the self knows the way, even when the ego is not holding the map. Trust that wholeness does not need to perform. In that trust, inner freedom appears, not loudly, not dramatically, but enduringly. And perhaps this is the final gift of the Jungian journey, not doing more, but resting in what is allowing life to speak in its own language. Can you feel it? There is nothing left to strive for now. As the ego steps back, the self begins to lead. The shadow returns to its rightful place, and everything gradually finds its rhythm. Carl Gustav Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." If this video touched something within you, you may leave a short line in the comments just for yourself. And if one day you wish to return to nights like these, and more gently, like the video, subscribe to the channel, so that when you need it, you have a place to return to. And now, perhaps deep sleep has already found you, or perhaps it arrived quietly at some point along this journey. Whenever it comes, I wish you a night that is truly calm, truly peaceful. Thank you.